One of the big stories to me of the offseason was going to be the Atlanta Falcons and where they stood since they had fired Dan Quinn. They had fired Thomas Dimitroff. You're going to be looking at a new general manager and a new head coach coming into the fold. Combining that with a team that features a top-level quarterback in Matt Ryan, who's on the wrong side of his mid-30s, you start to think about this and say, new general manager, new coach, aging star quarterback, typically means that that new regime is either going to do one of two things. They're either going to truly go all in to win now, to validate themselves and to support the star quarterback, or they're going to look to the future now and try to get their own quarterback. And either makes sense. Although to me it's kind of interesting that you're in a position where you have the 4th overall pick. And that traditionally is a spot that if you were looking for a quarterback, you might be able to get one. And in this year's draft, you had 5 quarterbacks go in the top 15 picks. You might not have gotten the first 3 picks all went quarterbacks, so you might have missed out on one of those guys if you had really loved them. There's still a couple of guys on the table, and maybe it would have made sense for Atlanta to stash one of them now. And I know there's some concerns in terms of, like, how wise is that from a roster standpoint in terms of where they stood in the salary cap? Fuck all that. You got to figure out some way to do this, especially when you're trying to start thinking about the next 10, 12, 15 years of the organization. So you don't draft a quarterback, which to me indicates, especially once you draft Kyle Pitts at 4, that you're trying to go all in now, which, like I said, you can potentially justify with having Matt Ryan in the fold. And a Julio Jones and a Calvin Ridley. Oh, wait, what do you mean you're going to trade Julio Jones? Huh? And then trade him after the draft has already happened so you don't get any of the picks for this year that could help your team right away. Really weird. And I talked about this at the time when that trade was happening, and even the talk about taking Kyle Pitts. Like, I was totally on board with them taking it. You had to gamble on that type of special athletic upside. But if you're going to do that, are you looking at him to replace Julio Jones? I don't know. It doesn't seem very sensible. If you were just going to do this, if you were just going to trade Julio Jones, then why the hell didn't you draft a quarterback there at 4? Maybe you didn't like either Justin Fields or Mac Jones at that point. That could certainly be the case. Maybe it is. Maybe they were in that ultimate no man's land of they missed out on the top 3 picks, so they didn't get one of those 3 quarterbacks, and they didn't happen to like either one of the other 2, including the Georgia kid, Justin Fields. Interesting to say the least. Yeah. They're going all in, which you have to say they are, by keeping Matt Ryan as a starter, not drafting a young quarterback in round 1. But then they trade away the best offensive weapon of the organization of the past decade. Now, maybe there's a piece of saying that Julio Jones is really good, but Julio Jones can get some injuries. He can miss some games. He's not that big of a red zone threat, which you would think for a guy of his size and skills that he would be. And there are certain things when it comes to Julio that the reality is not always what's talked about. But that said, seems less than ideal to be going into this season without your established number 1 or number 2, depending on how you view Julio compared to Calvin Ridley. So there's no question that Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith shook it up a little bit with this team. Brought in guys like Mike Davis and Cordero Patterson, Eric Harris, let go guys like Alex Mack and Keanu Neal and Justin McCray. Obviously the big trade away of Julio Jones. This is going to be a slightly different feeling Falcons team in 2021 no matter what. But good thing for them is they still have Matt Ryan in the fold. And Matt Ryan's one of those, to me, easy to underrate guys because he's not an elite guy. He is not a top 5 guy. There are certainly more than 5 quarterbacks that I would take over him. There certainly are not 9 or 10 quarterbacks that I would take over him. Matt Ryan, I will tell you exactly who reminds me of, if you understand the sport of baseball, Mike Mussina. Guy didn't win Cy Youngs, didn't have a bunch of 20-win seasons. He was just consistently really good and consistently top tier, but never truly elite, never really the best. That's how I kind of view Matt Ryan as, a Mike Mussina type. We'll see someday how he's viewed in terms of whether he's a Hall of Famer or not. I really hope it doesn't come down to whether or not the Falcons would have beat the Patriots in that Super Bowl, not giving up the 28-3 lead. Like, that one game really makes all the difference. Seems really dumb, frankly. But it is what it is. But they still have the franchise guy for whatever he's got left in the tank. I think their run defense is positioned to have a good year as well. For a defensive unit that sucked ass last year, seeing that run defense improving, I think will be something that will certainly be important for them. I look at Arthur Smith as a play caller, and I look at what he did with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee the past couple of years and how he customized the offense to Tannehill's strengths, minimized some of his deficiencies and weaknesses, got the best out of Tannehill that we've seen to date in his career in the NFL. And I look at him and I feel confident that he will do some good work here with Matt Ryan. He will do some good work with this offense, figuring out ways to deploy Calvin Ridley differently, figuring out ways to deploy and unleash Kyle Pitts. Have some confidence in Arthur Smith at least as a play caller. Several question marks about this team. Are they going to be able to run the ball at all? It's been kind of a bugaboo the past couple of years for this team, and I don't see where it's gotten any different or it's going to be any better. Pass protection. Like, they've invested some over the years on the offensive line with the McGarrys and the Lindstroms and the Jake Matthewses of the world. But when you especially got a guy like Matt Ryan back there, kind of more of a statuesque, lead-footed pocket passer, for the most part, you got to be able to protect him better. And at times, their protection could be a little spotty. And then their pass defense. They were a sieve last year. They got shredded all over the place. And again, I just look at that unit and I say, okay, what did you do to upgrade? What did you do to improve? And you brought in an offensive-minded head coach. I'm not so sure that that's going to fix much of the problems on that side of the ball. And to be truthful, it's probably going to take a couple of years to fix the problems on that side of the ball. But the good thing for the Falcons is they still have Matt Ryan. So they got a chance. Right? They certainly have the second-best quarterback in the division at the very least. When you look at their schedule coming up, I want to see how they come out to start the year, because the way that schedule is positioned, they could potentially get off to a decent start, which sometimes you see teams get off to hot starts and then they come crashing back down to earth. Other times teams get off to hot starts and they get a good rhythm, they get good momentum behind them, they start to get confident, they play above themselves. You look at this first 5 weeks of the season for the Falcons. Host Philadelphia, Matt Ryan versus Jalen Hurts. You got to go to Tampa in week 2, which is obviously a monster game. But then you go to the Giants in week 3. You're really scared of Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes. Week 4, you host Fitzmagic and the Washington football team. And then week 5, you're hosting a rookie quarterback, Zach Wilson and the Jets in Atlanta. Like, there's a chance here with this schedule. 3-2, maybe 4-1 start. The Falcons get off to that 4-1 start, it may potentially be enough to help propel them towards contending for a wild card spot in the NFC. A couple of other games I look at a little later in the year, weeks 13 and 14, a couple divisional games. You got Tampa at home. It would go a long ways to helping the Atlanta Falcons make the playoffs this year if they can beat Tampa at least once, and maybe week 13 is a spot that they do that. Then go to Carolina at week 14. Sam Darnold plays well, and that young Panthers defense takes a step forward. They're going to be in the mix as well here. So you're going to want to beat them, and that would be a good way to do it, even though you have to go to Carolina to do so. I say this is that I think there are, in terms of like actual teams, like entirety of roster, balance of roster, I actually can make the argument that the Atlanta Falcons are the worst team in this division. I really could. I think the Saints have more talent across the board. I think, frankly, the Panthers have more talent across the board. The Falcons have the worst roster overall. And you trade Julio Jones and don't get anything that's going to impact and help you immediately. That doesn't help either. That said, they also have, by far, no worse than the second best quarterback in this division. And that stuff matters quite a bit. If the Falcons get into a lot of shootouts, they can win those games because they might be able to put up more points. Even if you say, well, what do they do without Julio? I think they'll be just fine. It's not like Julio played every single game for the past decade, let's be clear. I think this Falcons team could be a borderline playoff team. I think they could be a team that hovers around 500-ish. I know with the 17-game schedule, you really can't talk about 500, but I'd say like 8 and 9 is where I see them right now, which doesn't sound great, but would certainly be an improvement from last year. But then also isn't all that great because you don't bring back Matt Ryan and not draft a quarterback of the future just to be mediocre as fuck. That's not how this is supposed to work. That's not how this should be done. But it could work out that way. They could win 9 games, maybe more, maybe less. Maybe I'm overrating Matt Ryan's impact a little bit, but when I look at the Falcons, even though I think they have the worst roster in this division, they have the second best quarterback, and I'm going to ride with that. So I think they'll finish second in the NFC South.